Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik with Figure It Out Productions. The following video is part of our Quick Shoot series.
Hey guys, it's Adam here, and welcome to part 5 of my 4th video game generation retrospective. Part 1 was about the generation as a whole, Part 2 was about the TurboGrafx-16, Part 3 was the Sega Genesis, aka Mega Drive, and Part 4 was about the Sega CD. Part 5 will be about the Sega 32X. Now again, I know the 32X, like the Sega CD, is not its own console. It is an add-on for the Sega Genesis, and originally I had intended to talk about it in that video. But I realized I had a lot to say about it. The 32X, very similarly to the Sega CD, was an add-on that is hideously misunderstood, and it's aptly shaped like a nuclear bomb, though. I mean, look at it. It looks like a mushroom cloud explosion over Sega. This thing did so much damage to Sega, which we'll talk about in a bit, but nevertheless, it actually isn't a bad piece of hardware. The Genesis was released in 1988, or Mega Drive in 1988 in Japan, 1989 in North America, and even by 91, it was showing its age a bit against the Super Nintendo, which is why they put out the Sega CD. But by 94, the future was here, in a sense. I mean, the Jaguar was out, the 3DO was out, the Amiga CD32 was out, like a lot of the early 5th gen stuff was out. Hell, in Japan, the Sega Saturn was released one day before the 32X was released here. Meanwhile, Sega decided that they wanted to boost the power of the Genesis. And I think what really initialized that to begin with was this game, Virtua Racing. Now see, this game is very odd in the Genesis library. This is a Genesis game, not a 32X game. But this game retailed at $100. Now, why the hell did that happen? Well, this was a game that was meant to kind of prove a point. Nintendo was obviously able to constantly claim they had better looking games because they were able to put in things like the FX chip, and they had a more powerful machine, honestly. So a lot of their games ended up looking better. And Sega wanted to prove that, no, we can do that. So they released this. This actually has almost an equivalent to the FX chip. It's got extra chips in here that do a lot of additional work that Genesis itself can't do. But the result is you get a pretty cool 3D looking game, at least for the time. I actually recommend picking this up as a novelty. It's actually quite cheap now. But they realized that was financially impractical. So that's one of the reasons that led to 32X. The 32X was essentially this similar technology with more upgrades, but they would only have to sell the hardware to you once, and then you could buy games just for it. Now, as a piece of hardware, like I said, it is not bad. It actually adds a lot of power to the Genesis. It has all sorts of brand new 3D graphical capabilities. It adds a lot of color capabilities to it. It has new sound features in it. It even goes out of its way, now we understand through RGB, that your Genesis games will look better when displayed through a 32X as opposed to a Genesis. Not like massively, but they are actually better. They have less rainbow banding and stuff like that. They do look improved on the 32X, which is actually pretty cool. But nevertheless, it bombed. Like I said, it's a bomb. It looks like one. So why did that happen? Well, there's a lot of reasons. It wasn't unreasonably priced, actually. It came out at $150 at launch in '94, which, from a marketing perspective, wasn't the worst idea. It was like, hey, look, you know, you see all these more expensive consoles, Jaguar, 3DO, whatever, and they're all like X amount of dollars, multi-hundreds. What if I told you Sega's next platform, its next generation of hardware, is going to only be $150, and all you got to do is stick it in your Genesis, and you get that sweet, sweet 32 bits. Wouldn't you like to make a Genesis 32 bits? Come on, just go ahead, just buy a little 32X over there. Go for it. That was weirdly how they seemed to market it, but they touted it as their next generation machine. One could dispute that this video belongs in the 5th generation series. Not really, but it could arguably be there. No one really seems to know. I would put it in the 4th gen just because it's an add-on. Obviously, I did put it there. But, yeah, so, I mean, that was, again, that's just how they touted it. And it wasn't that bad. It was, what killed it was the impractical nature of it. See, you could get it as an add-on, but Sega had also planned to make a console called the Neptune. We only ended up with prototype images of this thing. Someone owns a couple of the plastic cases somewhere, But it was supposed to be an all-in-one 32X and Genesis. The idea was you'd buy this is your next generation platform, but if you decide you want to stick with the Genesis, you can buy the add-on version and just attach that. Then, hence, you get the next generation of games. Now, obviously, people question,
Wait. Didn't you just say that the Saturn came out in Japan around the exact same time the 32X came out here? What was the point of that?
this is where it gets interesting, because there seems to be two totally different stories here. I would love to tell you the for sure truth, but honestly, I don't know. I've done a lot of looking into this, and I always come down to the two same stories. For every group of people that say this one version of history is totally right, there's just as many people saying the other version is totally right, and unfortunately, I can't find any concrete proof of which one. So here are the two versions of history. The first is that Sega of America initiated this. And they said, look, the Genesis is super popular here. We're going to go with the idea of making the add-on version and then making our own standalone platform that's the 32X and Genesis all built in. That way we have backwards compatibility and we just bring people over, blah, blah, blah. And that's what they did for a year until Sega of Japan eventually was like, you've got to stop this. You can't have a competing piece of hardware against the Saturn. You've got to drop it and release the Saturn. That is our 5th generation console, not this 32X thing. That is one version of history. I've also heard the exact opposite, which is that Sega of America was like, come on, man, bring over the Saturn. Give me the Saturn. Let's go, let's go. And Sega of Japan was like, oh, just calm down there, little boy. You're going to release this 32X thing. Why would we release the 32X? You're going to release it because the Genesis is so popular over there. Come on, Mega Drive ain't popular over here. People don't care about it here. They don't need the 32X. But over there, in America, it's crazy. People love the Genesis. Put this out there. Just do that instead. That'll be the next generation hardware. That's what we're going to do. And that Sega of America supposedly did this reluctantly. And then after a year, they came to terms with each other and then decided, okay, we're just going to have this one platform, the Saturn, and kind of sweep the 32X under the rug. I honestly don't know which is true. Typically, people are more vocal that the second story is true, so maybe that one's the truth. I always thought the first one was true because I thought that made more sense. But a lot of people have since told me, no, it's the other way. So, I don't know, because I also have people telling me the first way is true. Maybe you guys want to dispute that in the comments. I don't know. To me, it almost sounds like the reason this is a muddled piece of history is just because it's both sides pointing fingers at the other and just blaming, because nobody really wants to be responsible for the fucking 32X. The device that basically killed Sega as a hardware manufacturer. So the 32X's effect on Sega was, again, atomic cloud. It made people go, wait, you just said this was your new generation hardware. This is what I bought, and now you're telling me, no, fuck that, get a Saturn? Why would I trust you to do that? And people got a Saturn, and that lasted 2 years, and then, Bernie Stoller, genius that he was, Saturn's not our future, and drops the Saturn after 2 years to give us the Dreamcast. And despite the Dreamcast being fucking amazing, nobody had any real faith in it. It's a miracle it did as well as it did. And of course, it had to be dropped too, just because it ran out of money. This started that chain reaction. I mean, people will debate the Sega CD. Sega CD, that wasn't the problem. It didn't help matters, but the Sega CD was an add-on, and they always said as such. And it actually didn't do awful. I think to this day, it's still the most successful add-on ever produced, financially. But the 32X, you certainly can't make that claim for. Let me talk about my personal experience with it, because I actually have a story from my youth about this one. I had a friend with one of these. I know. I knew a person who had a 32X when it was commercially relevant. Now, he was one of my good childhood friends, and we both got the Genesis around the exact same time. And we both had the Model 2, just like you see here. This was actually my childhood Model 2. I know, because I put a sticker on it as a child. So we both had this, and we were constantly talking about our video games. So I went over to his house one day, and he made a point of making it obvious that the Genesis was going to be visible to me, and because he knew I was going to ask. When I immediately saw the 32X on top, I was like, what the hell is that? And he's like, oh, you noticed that, huh? Yeah, look at that. Isn't that cool? You know what that is? That's 32 bits of power right there. And I was like, 32 bits? No. 32? I thought it was 16. It's 32 now, bitch. Like, that was his attitude. So it was so funny. But yeah, so he was like, yeah, man, I got this, and now I was like, well, what does it do? How does it work? He was like, well, you plug it in here, and then you plug it in here, and you plug it in here and here. Basically, he was like, all right, well, you connect it, and then it requires its own power supply, which is fucking fucking stupid. But like the Sega CD, has since been fixed by fans. You can buy power cables that power all three at once. I did a video on that if you're curious. It also required a patch cable that connected from the 32X down to the console, which he showed to me, and of course the video out to the television. And so I looked back there and it looked kind of wonky, but I was like, whatever, it doesn't matter, it's all connected. So I was like, all right, well, so let's play something on it. He's like, all right, let's play something on it. So he pops in like Sonic 2, and I was like, yeah, man, I've played Sonic 2 a million times. He's like, yeah, look how much better it looks. Which it didn't, because we were playing it through composite. Eventually I was like, come on, man, how about, what are these 32-bit games you keep talking about? Let's see some of those 32 bits. And he was like, sure. And he whips out, of course, Virtual Racing. Now this kid was obsessed with racing and cars. I don't know if he still is. He moved to Atlanta years ago. I haven't seen him in a long time. But he was obsessed with racing, man. So like 90% of the games in his library were racing games. And this was the one he was touting. He had this and he had Virtual Fighting, which is standard. It came with the console. He didn't really care about that game that much, but he was like, you gotta play this, you gotta play this. So we were playing it. It was impressive in 1994. I mean, it's very polygon-like 3D graphics, but I was like, whoa, cool. But it kind of reminded me of like a big blockbuster movie with amazing visual effects that has no story. Like, it just didn't captivate me. So I was like, can we try the other one? He's like, oh yeah, sure. We pop in Virtual Fighting. He's like, yeah, it looks really good, doesn't it? Look at those 32 bits. You want to play Virtual Racing again? I was like, no, I'd try this for a little bit. Neither game was particularly interesting to me, but I was impressed by the visuals of that game, or the platform. So a time came later in the year when I was like, I think I told this story in a different video, but I was presented with a situation where my mom had agreed to get me a Sega 32X. So we went to, I believe it was Toys R Us, and I was this close to getting it, but then ended up getting a PS1. And I'm really glad I made that decision, because the PS1 was a lot of fun. And I feel bad that I didn't continue to support Sega, but obviously I was right, because the 32X it must have been discontinued right around then.
I'd like to note that my friend never bought another piece of Sega hardware or software again. He switched over to Nintendo and then ultimately to Sony, which I think happened to a lot of people.
Ultimately, it only had something like 44 games on it, and the library is really thin, unfortunately. Even though, like I said, it's a neat piece of hardware, it's just that it just wasn't around for very long and developers didn't really grit their teeth and get into it. But yeah, there's an example of a game for it, and that was really my experience with it until I was older, and I picked one up probably when I was in high school. I started tracking down a lot of Sega hardware, and that was one of the things I got. I now have like 3 of these things. I mean, they're not that hard to get. But yeah, Virtual Racing is the first game I wanted to show you guys. Now, I'm just going to go through a list of a few games that are notable for one reason or another, just for the hell of it. Cosmic Carnage. I think if anybody here watches Classic Game Room, they know this. Mark from Classic Game Room. This is his Shenmue. He talks about it just as much as I talk about that beautiful masterpiece right there, Shenmue, all the time. He loves this game. I picked it up on that recommendation. It's a fighting game that the first thing I noticed about it is that it uses the same sound effects as Mighty Morphin Power Rangers the movie on the Genesis. I don't know why, but that was the first thing I noticed about it. Honestly though, the game itself, I didn't really like it that much. But then again, I like fighting games, I'm just not that good at them, so I would be totally open to going back and playing this again though. Then I got, this is a weird one, FIFA Soccer 96. Now this is the only European game that I have, so you can get a sense of what the artwork was like over there. I got this in my trip to the UK last year. The only reason I picked this up is because it's one of 2 European 32X exclusives. The other one is a game called Dark Side, which is ridiculously impossible to find a legitimate copy of. You can find production copies that are much cheaper, but the official one is very, very hard and very, very expensive. But yeah, that's a European 32X game. Then we got the closest thing we would get to a Sonic game. We did not get a Sonic game on this thing. Instead, we got Knuckles Chaotix. This game sucks. I'm sorry, but I hated this game. I really tried to like it. It kind of showed what I think what they thought they could do with the additional 32X power. It did look nicer, but it also looked, at the same time, also looked kind of weird. It's a little off-putting. But the gameplay, so bad. I'm sorry, it was terrible. It was well-made shit. if that makes any sense. Like, it wasn't buggy, it wasn't glitchy, it was just not fun. Because, like, the tradition with a Sonic-style game is, you know, you're a single character who's running to the end of the screen, fundamentally, and you might have Tails with you, but he doesn't bog you down, he just shows up whenever. This game was about Knuckles and any other number of characters. Basically, you were bound to them with, like, a ring and a chain, and you had to get through these maps by kind of swinging them over each other, and I just didn't like that at all. There's actually a prototype of a Genesis game called, I guess it was supposed to be Sonic 4, or it was at some point, sometimes it's known as Sonic and Crackers. I have been told that that is a prototype of the fourth game that actually used the same basic gameplay elements. If it's true that that's really what Sega was doing and that isn't just some fan-made bullshit, then I'm really glad they canceled it, because that was a piece of crap. I'm sorry. I'm glad to have it, certainly, but I think there's a reason we haven't really seen this game show up in, like, any sort of virtual collection or re-release of any kind. It's just, I think it got buried for a reason. And then, I'm going to show you guys something pretty cool. I just got this, and I paid a stupid amount of money. I shouldn't have done it, but at the same time I did it because it was, for what this is, was a really good deal. I'm not going to tell you how much though, because I'm too embarrassed. I got the Amazing Spider-Man Web of Fire. This is the fucking holy grail of the 32X. This is the Panzer Dragoon saga. This is the stadium events of the 32X. Supposedly the story goes that this was the last game on the console and only like 1,200 copies were ever released. It barely made it out. And I have it, of course, in a nice plastic case to keep it safe. Honestly though, I played this on the EverDrive, I played this even on emulators. This is a crappy game. And that sucks. But but I'm sure Stadium Events is a shitty game too. But nevertheless, really cool to have it. I'm not gonna tell you what I paid, but I'll give you a clue. I paid 50% less than this game usually goes for boxed. So that's all I'm telling you. But it's not an amount of money you should usually spend on a video game, but it was, even though it was a lot of money, it was way too good of a deal to pass up on something this rare. So there it is. The holy grail of the 32X. Now, there is one other thing I want to discuss regarding the 32X before we go here, which is the 32X CD combo. I did an entire video on this, you can go check that out for more details, but towards the end of the whole lifespan of this console, this whole platform, there was one company that decided, hey, you know what we should do is make games that utilize the power of all three of these platforms combined, which I think even now is a really neat idea. Yes, it's dinosaur technology by comparison to what we have now, but just as a fanatic, it would be interesting to see what these are really capable of. So when I found out there were some games released that did that, I was like, that's fucking awesome, I want to see! Unfortunately, all these games were made by a company called Digital Pictures. And as that would imply, every single one of them is a fucking FMV game. I have a few of them. This is the one I did a video about. This is Corpse Killer. Now this game already existed on the Sega CD, so the only real way it utilizes the 32X is to get more color out of the image and give you a better picture. But it's not by any means impressive. Like I said, I did a whole video on that where I actually compared it to the Sega Saturn version just to see what this is capable of versus what the Saturn is capable of. But since nobody made a real game for this combination, we won't really know. But there is one company out there that I think that might do this, only one, a company called Watermelon. You guys would know them. I already mentioned them in the Genesis video, and I'm going to mention them again. They made Pure Solar, which is a game that's coming to the Dreamcast soon, actually. And I even talked about this in the Genesis video. I have no idea if this is even possible. So forgive me if this is ridiculous for even mentioning, but the Genesis version of that game came with a bonus music CD for the Sega CD. If you had that, you could use the CD audio in the Genesis game. What if they redid it, now that they've redone the game for PC, Wii U, Xbox One, PS4, Dreamcast? What if they re-released it on the Genesis with 32X support? If it had the 32X, it could look better. And use the Sega CD and get the music. I'm not claiming for even a single second that that's a thing that's in production or whatever, but damn, that would be cool. Or a brand new game would be nice too, but I can see why that would not be a thing. All I'm saying is, it would be nice to get a Genesis game that has some bonus code in it that does additional things if you have a 32X. That is all. But yeah, guys, that's really it on the 32X. It's an underrated piece of equipment, but it's cumbersome. You know, like, that was the biggest problem with it as an add-on. When you look at it, it comes with this extra piece of plastic depending on what version of the Genesis you have. You either have to take that off or keep it in. You also had these patch cables that would run from the Genesis to the 32X, but different versions of the Genesis didn't use the same video output, so you had to have another patch cable on the patch cable to make it work. You had to have an extra power supply. Certain versions of the Genesis were too small to fit with this thing. Certain versions of the Genesis couldn't support this thing. Like, it was just a complicated mess that with the 32X, and even though I like it as a piece of hardware and as ultimately a niche just thing, I really wish it had never happened. It should not have happened. It would have made it much easier for Sega when they went into the Saturn, and yeah, that's it. It's cool because it exists, I guess, but it should never have existed. So that's kind of my final thoughts on it. Thank you guys for watching. Please stay tuned to part 6, which will be on, I think, a lot of people's favorite, the Super Nintendo. So thank you guys, and I'll see you all later.